When did
Yes.
they become extinct?
So that was roughly the time frame of when the Lenape were living here. So I said the Ice Age was what, 18,000 years ago? The Lenape were living off the land about 16,000 years ago. So while they were still living off the land, they would eventually start hunting this fish to extinction. Now, why they
hunt the fish that big? Though?
Well, in order for them to actually hunt this fish, they would utilize different ways of catching fish, which one big way was utilizing something called a fishing weir. Now, they made different varieties of fishing weir, but the one they used here was a stone fishing weir, because that was the abundance of resources they had here. Yeah. So they would utilize the stones, put those stones into the river, kind of making like a tunnel for this fish to swim into, where the space would get smaller and smaller. Eventually, it couldn't swim anymore. They would use their spears to hunt this fish and feed majority of their clan members. Now, this fish was very valuable because of the abundance of meat it contained with it. So that's why it got hunted so much. It could feed majority of their clans and even other clans that lived in the area. Now, what would end up happening is, I said they hunted the animals. They also utilized a lot of the vegetation that grew here. One, to make their homes and their log houses. And two, for utilizing the herbs that grew here for medicinal purposes as well. I must not forget also that they utilized the berries that grew here to make dye for a lot of their clothing and also to show off different parts of their clans as well. Now, eventually, over time, as they lived on the land, they had other clans coming in. And while the Lenape lived here, those other clans, they wanted to come into the land and hunt on it. This is where they would eventually start making kind of like treaties amongst each other, where they would say, you can live off the land for about a year. And at the end of the year, you'd have to renew this treaty. Kind of like leasing now. Now, when they did this, this would allow the other clans to come in and utilize the land to their needs. Now, eventually, the Lenape, they would encounter another group of settlers. These group of settlers were coming from New Amsterdam and slowly making their way here. Do you guys happen to know who those settlers were? That's correct, the Dutch settlers. Now, when the Dutch settlers made their way here, they were mainly looking for an area to start making produce, to basically start farming, because how they made their money was selling a lot of their crops. Now, when they made their way here, they believed that this was the perfect place to do it with the abundance of water they could make farmland with. Now, there was one big issue. Well, the soil here, with the amount of water here, it actually helped the farmland prosper here. The Lenape lived off the land, and they also did a lot of farming here. That's actually where they adopted a way of farming, which was called the Three Sisters, where they would plant 3 crops together. They would plant squash, corn, and beans, and these all helped each other. The squash would keep away rodents, the corn made the stalk grow tall, and the beans would grow around the corn so it could reach sunlight. So, when the Dutch came here, they believed that this could be the perfect place to start setting up farmland, but their biggest issue was, well, the land was already owned by the Lenape. They were living off the land already. So, what would eventually end up happening is, when the Dutch arrived here, they would start trying to bargain with the Lenape and give gold to the Lenape. Now, the Lenape had their own way of currency, which was mainly trading amongst each other. They would trade certain material. Now, when they started receiving this gold, they believed that, well, we could utilize this for something. Now, eventually, what would end up occurring is when the Dutch came here and started trading, they would start buying clothing from the Dutch to start actually putting into their actual culture, to start actually wearing that. And that's how their culture started to slowly expand into other things, where they started wearing into modern day clothing. But as they were coming here and trading their resources with each other, they would give the Lenape a large sum of gold. And they believed that this was going to be for a treaty for them to come into the land and utilize the resources. So they accepted this gold, and at the end of the year, when they had to come back and re-talk about their treaty, the Dutch were a little bit hostile. They believed, we gave you gold, so now we officially own the land. It's now ours. So what eventually would occur would be that the Dutch would retaliate and try and kick them out of their land. Now the Lenape, they would flee this area and eventually start traveling west. They didn't want to fight, so they left. So when they left, they would travel west, where they made their way towards Ohio, Texas, and finally Oklahoma, Now in Oklahoma is where they still live present day. Now on that journey west, I said they still live in Oklahoma, but on that journey they encountered different turmoils, like for instance the French and Indian War, and also the Revolutionary War, which means they had to also fight in those wars, and some parts of the clan didn't want to fight anymore. So instead of traveling west, some split off and went north, where they went towards Wisconsin and Canada, and that's where some of that clan still lives present day as well. Now how we know this is mainly because we have actually great connections with those tribes, and we actually fly them out here every year to do historical programs here on site. To talk about their history, their culture, and show off a lot of their historical regalia that they have in their possession, which is pretty cool. But also, we just started a program where we're actually bringing them inside the school systems this year and teaching the school systems about their history and culture as well, which is pretty awesome. Now we're going to time travel back in time, not from present day, but back to when the Dutch settlers acquired this area. When they finally acquired this area, they would start realizing in order for us to start really making our homes here, we need to slowly start dividing us up into different divisions. Like for instance, some going into masonry to make bricks, some going into woodworking to start making lumber for our houses, and some went into more, I like to say, an artsy flow, an artsy field, where they started going into decorations. And one of them painted this picture of our waterfall. So I'll bring it closer. Looks kind of similar. Just minus all the futuristic buildings here. Now what would end up happening is a man would eventually make his way here to where the Dutch settlers were making their homes.
I'm sorry, this is around what year? Sorry.
So this would be in the 1600s.
1600.
Yes.
Wow.
So one man would make his way here. His name was William Hall, and he would eventually buy this painting. Now this painting, since he was very close with a friend of his that was participating in King's College at the time, his name was Alexander Hamilton, he would give this painting towards Alexander Hamilton. And on the back of it, there would be a note, basically saying whenever you get the chance, feel free to make your way here. It's a perfect place to visit. Now eventually he would make his way here, but not on the right circumstances. When he made his way here, he would actually be participating during the Revolutionary War and have a picnic here with General George Washington. Now, General George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, during this picnic in 1778, they were discussing what their next steps would be for the Revolutionary War. Now, unfortunately, what they would eventually come up with is going towards Morristown. Morristown, if you don't know the history behind it, I'll give you a little slim of it, because I don't want to talk too much about it. In Morristown, they would eventually set up a winter encampment there, where they would be stuck there for about 3 winters.
Just went to different color.
Ah, yes.
Oh, we were supposed to go there, right?
Yeah, they have some cool video kept shells left.
Yep. Now, they would be stuck there for about 3 winters, which would lead to a lot of their soldiers leading to starvation.
They had a very cold winter.
Yeah, there was a very cold winter. And it was very hard to get resources there and find food. So they had to... That's correct. I like to say they made something called boot soup. So what they would end up doing is actually boiling their boots. That way they can not only get the source of protein from the horse fat that was utilized to glue all the shoes together, but also to chew on the leather and eat it. Now, before they went towards Morristown, Alexander Hamilton, he sparked this idea of making our nation independent. But in order for us to do this, we had to start making our own supplies. Now, during the Revolutionary War, the supplies we were getting were from our allies, which were who? It would be the French. So we were getting a lot of our supplies from the French, and they realized that in order for us to become independent, we need to be able to make our own supplies. But where? Eventually, he would come to the realization that, hey, maybe this could be the perfect place to do it. Utilizing not the waterfall, but the power source of the water itself, we can utilize that to start making these supplies here. And he put that idea in motion. He would come back here in 1791 and 1792 to form an organization. That organization's name would be called the SUM. That stands for the Society for Establishing Useful Manufacturing. Now this was going to be the seed that spread into the city you guys are standing in now. And this organization was going to make Paterson the first planned industrial city of the nation here. But in order for them to do this, they needed some help. This is where they would also call in a friend. This friend's name was William Paterson. Now William Paterson, he was the second governor of New Jersey. And what William Paterson would eventually end up doing is once he started speaking to Alexander, he would ask if they needed assistance. Alexander would say yes, and he would offer tax breaks for them to start doing their construction here, which started the process of them slowly expanding and making their industry. But their biggest issue was, yes, we can use the water power, but how? How are we going to use it? And this is where we begin our walking section of our tour and making our way to our next location and talk about our source of power for our city here, all right? On that note, do you guys have any questions for me before we start walking? The first